In the tradition of old Christmas, y'all have heard lots and lots of old stories. But sometimes the storytellers themselves wanted to tell things that they experienced. And with that, here we go. I grew up on the very same farm that my father grew up on. Granny had given him 5 acres of land, and he had built a little small house, but it didn't matter. I spent most all of my time with my Granny Hopson. Staying with her was so much fun. This old house that my daddy had grown up in did not have electricity. It did not have running water. It consisted of 3 rooms built out of these big giant logs. There was a front porch and just a little tiny back porch. Now, what we did all day was Granny told me stories, and we just got to do things, she and I being together. Now the best thing, or one of the best things about there, was the fact that she had a barn full of animals, hogs and cows and mules. And she had lots and lots and lots of chickens. And those chickens had free roam. They could just go anywhere. And don't ask me why, but chickens will come into the house if the door's open. When you don't have electricity, you're depending on the air to move just by wind. And so you keep the doors open, you keep the windows up, everything. My job was to keep those chickens shooed out of the house. And I did that job diligently. One afternoon, Granny and I were sitting there. We'd been real busy in the garden all morning, and Granny says, "Bruce, I think I'm going to take a nap. Do you want to take a nap?" I said, "Oh, no ma'am, I'm fine." So I'm sitting out front there on a big rocking chair, and Granny lays down. In just a few minutes, she's sound asleep. I can look and see her mouth open, and I can hear her making noises, and oh goodness, but it wasn't long until I heard a little tick, 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 tick. And I looked into the kitchen, and there were 4 or 5 of Granny's big old Rhode Island red hens. Well, I knew what I was supposed to do, so I stood up out of the rocking chair, walked around, and shooed those chickens out. Just shoo, 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 shoo. They knew they weren't supposed to be in the house, so they immediately turned and went out. And I turned around and looked, and one of them had not gone. And I looked, and there he was, Big Red, my Granny Hopson's favorite rooster, a Rhode Island red rooster that must have stood about that tall, and he had those big old yellow beaded eyes, and he knew I was afraid of him. And so he would just look at me, and I would look at him. And I just thought, man, I got to have some help shooing him out. So I reached over by the wood stove there, and I picked up Granny's big old corn broom. And I started walking over toward Big Red, and I am going to show him who's boss. Well, when I get that broom drawn back, I thought, you know what? I really need to teach that rooster a lesson. So I just turned that broom around, and I took a 10-year-old swing just as hard as I could. And when I came around with that broom, what happened next was not my fault. I was going to hit that rooster in the wings and hit him in the legs. I wanted to knock him out the door. But that rooster ducked, and when he did, this broom handle hit him right upside the head with about 4 or 5 flops and flounders and flipping. Granny's favorite rooster died right there in the kitchen floor. I don't know what to do. I am panic-stricken. That was my granny's favorite rooster, and I had just killed it. I turned and looked back in the living room there. Granny was laying back on the bed there. She was sound asleep. She didn't know anything had gone on. So then I made a decision. I ran over. I picked up that rooster, made sure there weren't any blood on the floor, picked up any feathers, whatever, cradled him in my arms, went out the back door on the back porch, went around and climbed up under the house. I crawled up under the house. I got up under there pushing Big Red, and I got up right beside the chimney, took my fingers, dug out a little hole there and everything, put that rooster in it, and then just pushed some dirt back over him. Came back out, went by the well, got me some water, washed off my hands, dusted off my breeches, made sure I didn't have any blood or any feathers on me. I went back in, sat right back down in the rocking chair and went to rocking, just like nothing had ever happened. A little while later, Granny gets up and she's got to cook supper. So she's in the kitchen, whatever. She says, well, before I do that, she says, let's go feed the chickens and let's get the eggs. And so we go out on the porch, and Granny takes her 2-pound coffee can and goes down into this big bucket there and pulls up the feed for the chickens. And she's out there, and I've seen her do this hundreds of times. She's on the edge of the porch, and she's throwing that corn, and she's calling them, chick, 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 chickie. And boy, they're coming out of the barns, they're coming out of the corn cribs, out of the smokehouse, they're just everywhere. They're running around out there. And then Granny did what I've seen her do hundreds of times. She's counting those chickens. And then she kind of says, wait a minute. Let me start over. And then she turns to me and she says, baby, that's what she called me. She says, baby, she says, we're missing a chicken. She says, no, wait a minute, it's not, oh, it's a rooster. She says, well, I'm missing Big Red. I don't see him. I said, Granny, I don't know what could have happened. I don't know anything about Big Red, and she says, oh, maybe a fox got him or whatever. And she goes in and we go get the eggs and come back. She cooks supper. She goes out once again, feeds them and counts them. And first thing the next morning she gets up, goes out and counts, and they're not there. And that day, then the second day, she's feeding and counting, and she is just worried to death about that rooster that she hadn't seen in 2.5 days now. So we're sitting there that afternoon in the rocking chairs, me and Granny rocking, and she's telling me a story, when all of a sudden, Granny stopped mid-rock, and she does this. She turned to me and she says, baby, she says, do you smell that? She says, something has crawled up under this house and died. And I said, Granny, I went back to rocking. I said, Granny, I don't smell a thing, And she says, oh no, come on, let's go. And so we go out on the porch, go down, go around the house, get back by the apple trees, and she says, go under there and see if you can find it. I says, oh, Granny, I don't want to go under there, She says, why not? She says, I've seen you go under there. Come on, do that. I said, no, Granny, I don't want to do it, And so she says, well, just get out of the way. I'll do it. Granny gets down on her knees. She crawls under the house. In about a minute, she says, Bruce, baby. She says, go to the barn and get me a shovel. And a few minutes later, I get her the shovel, and she comes out on her knees. She's dragging that shovel, and up on the shovel lays the half-rotten, full of worms carcass of Big Red. And she comes out and she says, "Oh, there's Big Red, you know, wonder what happened to him." And I'm standing there and I'm crying and I'm crying and I'm crying. I knew I had been caught and I knew I had to finally tell the truth. And I'm telling Granny the story. I said, "Granny, let me tell you what happened." And I'm just crying and crying. And I knew what was about to happen. That was my grandmother's favorite rooster. She loved that rooster. Granny puts her hands on her hips and she looks at me. She says, "You killed Big Red?" "Yes, ma'am, I did." She says, "Why in the world didn't you wake me up? We could have at least had him for supper."